Welcome to the North Carolina Divorce Info Podcast, where we get answers to your questions about divorce in North Carolina.
Welcome to the NC Divorce Info Podcast. My name is Dustin Cannon, and my guest today is Paul Golden, and we're talking about financial infidelity. Paul Golden is with the National Endowment for Financial Education, a nonprofit foundation inspiring educated financial decision-making for individuals and families through every stage of life. In addition to his role as spokesperson, Golden is responsible for communications and media and public relations efforts for the foundation. Golden is a go-to source for media outlets throughout the country, including the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, the Washington Post, Fox Business, Forbes, Reuters, U.S. News and World Report, and others. Paul, welcome to the NC Divorce Info Podcast.
Hey, Dustin, it's good to join you.
Hey, I've read that the top two issues that couples fight about are money and sex. And there's disagreement about which one is first and which one's second. But when it comes to arguments about money, I think that probably the issue is the question of what do we spend our money on? And so I think this is probably a topic that is going to be great for our listeners.
And as a financial education foundation, we're only interested in the first one that you mentioned. So
Right.
So I might have anecdotal on the second one, but I'll stay as much as I know to the first one.
When I think about infidelity in a marriage, I naturally think of cheating, but I'm learning that financial infidelity is actually a big problem, much bigger than I realized. How common is financial infidelity?
Well, it's another form of cheating. It's financial cheating, money cheating. It's still, not being completely honest and going behind the back of your spouse or partner. And this is something that we've been looking at for more than 10 years now. And we do it through a biennial. So every 2 years, we're doing a survey of the general adult population and asking, we ask two different types of this. We ask, has this happened in your relationship? And do you admit yourself that you are committing an act of financial deception in your relationship? And among couples where money is combined in the relationship, in our latest survey, we find that 2 in 5 said that they admit that they are committing an act of financial deception against their partner or spouse. When we started doing this, it was in the low 30s. So over the decade, we have seen the incidence of financially cheating rise within couples. So, it's something that bears having conversations like this. So you can, one, understand why it happens, recognize the warning signs, and then 3, hopefully come up with some sort of resolution as a couple.
So did you say 30? Did you mean 30% of couples?
When we first started doing the survey, it was about, 1 in 3 people admitted to committing an act of financial deception. And when we talk about these acts of financial deception, it can be seemingly small, kind of benign things like maybe you hit a purchase or you hit a little extra cash on the side. But there's larger discretions that happen on the other end of the spectrum where people are lying about bank accounts that they have, lying about the amount of debt that they owe, lying about the amount of income that they make. So even seemingly small indiscretions can lead to bigger problems. So when we started doing it 10 years ago, we saw about 1 in 3 admitted to doing this in the relationship. And in our latest survey, we're seeing 2 in 5. So it's about 40%. It's over 40% now.
Now, why do you think people would have secret bank accounts and secret debts and so on? Why do you think they choose to be unfaithful financially?
Well, I think if it's going on in a relationship, there's a fundamental problem there. And I think that, before issues with money management, it's things like communication and trust. And we do ask people, if you're doing this in your relationship, why? And most people, almost half of the respondents, say that they were embarrassed or fearful about what they were doing, and they knew that they were going to be negatively judged by their partner. So, we all have different money personalities, and it's not uncommon for one person to be a spender or saver or whatever the case is. But, if somebody behaves a way financially and they feel like they're going to be negatively judged by their partner, they're more likely to keep it underground. And so that's one of the biggest things that we see.
Do you think that they think that there's anything wrong with that? I'm guessing that they do if they're hiding it. Or do they think, do you find that most think that that's just a natural part of a
I
relationship.
think some people do think it's natural. I think some people are really trying to keep it under the covers. I was really surprised that about 1 in 3 people say that even though that they're in this committed relationship, so you're married or you're with your partner or spouse and you're sharing everything about who you are. 1 in 3 people still think that even though they're in this committed relationship, that money still should remain private. And it just goes to show you it's still a very taboo subject. We're still very private about our behaviors and our values and, the decisions that we make with money. And, it's those conflicts in behaviors that we have with other people that might lead to these problems. And so, it's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. And we're finding that most people, if they weren't going to be negatively judged for what they had done, whether that was being out at the mall and doing a little retail therapy and buying a purchase on the side or having a completely hidden account, they probably wouldn't do that or be as prone to doing that if they had better communication with their partner.
Right. And I know that, different married couples have different philosophies about how they handle their money. And I know that, I have friends who they have their common account and then they also have, they might have, this is my account that I do with whatever I want. And so much goes into that. And I don't have to ask anybody about it. Do you find that, is that a common way to handle it?
And that's something we ask, is that a resolution? 2 in 5 people say that they don't combine finances with their partner. And that's not to say that that's the right answer for everyone, but, somewhere in the middle there, a compromise is probably going to be helpful. I like the idea that if you're maintaining separate accounts and having one joint household account, that maybe you can set guidelines for how much each person is going to pay toward household expenses. So, like if my partner or spouse is, bringing in 70% of the income, the household income, to be equitable, they should be paying 70% of, the mortgage and the utilities. Let's keep it equitable. But you can, I think there's some pros there, to having separate accounts. You can manage your money as you like. You don't have to worry about how you're going to be judged. You're not on the hook for, poor spending decisions that your partner might be making. You get some privacy. And there's pros to combining accounts as well, too. I think it makes the household money management a little easier. There's a stronger likelihood for transparency. Everyone has equal access to money. And I think if you're going to still maintain joint accounts, maybe each person in the party gets an allowance, sort of a little bit amount of indiscretion, or like discretionary spending that they can, do with what they want. They can spend it how they choose.
I was once surprised by delighted by my wife's financial infidelity. She once surprised me with a good amount of cash for something, and I had no idea that she had it. And she had been, when she'd go to the store for household items or grocery items or whatever, she would take out an extra $20, $30, $40, whatever, over time, and was just stashing that away.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good benefit.
Yeah, and so I didn't notice it, But what that kind of brings into the next subject, the next question. What are some of the signs that a spouse or a partner may be hiding something or cheating on the money issue?
Yeah, I always used to kind of say it's like, okay, you're going through a pair of pants, getting it ready to laundry, and a wadded up piece of paper falls out, and it's got this number on it that you don't recognize, but it's not a phone number. It's kind of this receipt to a place you didn't know about or something.
Right.
It's like kind of the same thing. It feels just as shocking that you didn't know about this thing going on. But I would look for things. Red flags to me would be is if you try to engage your partner about conversations related to money and they become defensive or they're withdrawn and they don't want to talk about it. If they're making sure that they're paying certain bills, when they come due at the month, they're intercepting the statements before they come in through the email or through the physical mail.
Right.
Maybe removing the itemization portion of a credit card statement or a bank statement or something like that. Those are little things that might tip you off that something is going on because somebody has to actually go out of their way to do those. And so, those are the things I'd look at. But most commonly is if you just try to do some general communication and they really shut down on you, that's a big warning sign to me.
They just refuse to talk about it?
They just don't want to talk about money, and that tells me that there's something going on internally within them that they're not comfortable about, because we share our lives together, and if we're not going to talk about that, then there's something going on. And so those are the things I'd look at. So, I mean, if you suspect it's going on, try to have more of a simple conversation that comes up when, it's not going to lead to defensiveness and fighting. You don't want to attack somebody. You don't want to sabotage them and say, aha, here's this statement and I found it. It's just maybe you could say, you know what, I've done some misspending that I think you should know about. Kind of open up the conversation that way, and that might become more of an amenable and more of a comfortable agreement or a comfortable way of having that conversation. So, I think it's just look for the warning signs, and then before you engage with the partner or spouse, if you suspect this is going on, or if you are the person who's committing these acts of infidelity, think beforehand, what do you want to get out of the conversation, and kind of plan around that. It's just going to be a much better outcome.
Yeah. Those are good ideas. I was going to ask, how somebody should go about it, but that's a good way to go about it, because if you just approach somebody, they're going to go on the defensive, and it's just going to start an argument, especially about money. And so I don't think you're going to get anywhere. Can you tell me just a bit? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, and if you're, no matter what side of this issue you're on, accept that the conversation's going to, have some stress points to it. It's going to be tough to have. And if the acts of financial deception have been going on for a while, or if they're on that larger scale that we've talked about, realize that it's going to take some time of communication and regular transparency, sustained transparency, and a commitment from both sides to, overcome it. It's just I would say it's much like a sexual infidelity that occurs. You've got this breakdown of trust, and it's going to take some time to reestablish.
Ever since my wife did that with the stashing away cash, I actually, after that, I started asking her to do it. We've got 5 kids, and so that's a lot of kids, and that's a lot of Christmas presents. And I would say, can you keep doing that? Because I'm not so good at saving money. So I would say, do that throughout the year,
and I think that's it. I think that's great that, and that's a good point about this, is not every act of financial, and I'm doing air quotes here, infidelity leads to something that has a negative consequence on the relationship. You're giving a perfect example of one right there. And 10% of the people that we talk to say, that because of an act of indiscretion occurred, they became closer together as a couple. So they started to communicate more. They started to share their goals more. They started to take the time to learn each other's values and how they were different. Maybe they figured out an alternate way of how they were going to manage the household finances and have some discretionary spending money and some privacy and those type of things. So there is this opportunity for there to be a silver lining when these issues come up, in your example that you provided with you and your wife, but also just, maybe better communication. It doesn't all have to be negative outcomes, which unfortunately that's what we see the most. We see that when financial infidelity occurs, it leads to arguments. It leads to that breakdown in trust that we talked about. Unfortunately and regretfully, in 13% of these situations, it leads to divorce. And so those are the things that,
Did you say 14%?
Become worries. 13%.
13.
Where financial infidelity is at an issue among couples. 13% of the time it does lead to divorce. And, those are the things that you get concerned about.
So before we wrap it up, I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit more about the National Endowment for Financial Education and what it is that you do.
Well, we're a nonprofit, and what we do is simplistically, really to simplify it, we provide resources and educational materials to help people better manage their money, to open up communication within their families, to think about how they're, setting goals for their future, how they're handling crises as they occur. So we are an educational resource provider. We're also a big research shop. So we're doing a lot of things like looking at this issue of financial infidelity and other behavioral issues to understand why people do the things they do with money and how we can better meet them when they're engaging in or experiencing these different difficulties and challenges. So we are a nonprofit and we are a private operating foundation, which is nice because we're able to kind of sustain our work just for the greater good.
Okay. Well, Mr. Golden, I appreciate your talking with us today about financial infidelity.
Dustin, it's been great to join you. Thanks for having me on.
We've been talking today with Paul Golden about financial infidelity and marriage. You could learn more about Paul Golden and the National Endowment for Financial Education at ncdivorceinfo.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the NC Divorce Info Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the North Carolina Divorce Info Podcast at ncdivorceinfo.com.